those whose hearts are set on anything. Ask anybody how they can be dissuaded or persuaded or made to cause to be pulled away from what they want or they desire. If they abandon their quest of it, they only do so under pressure. If a man abandons his quest for a woman, a car, a house, a job that he wants with all that he's got, he only does it under pressure or because of some counteraction. He doesn't do it freely. Man's pressured into things. Well, God has to change your will into His will in order for you to come to a knowledge of truth. On the other hand, when God works in us, the will is changed under the sweet influence of the Spirit of God. That's how we come to a knowledge of Christ. Once more, it desires and acts, not of compulsion. It's not compelled. Man is not compelled to come to Christ. When he's a dead pile of dung out in the field, he's not compelled by something within himself. It's not by compulsion, but its own desire and spontaneous inclination. Its bent still cannot be altered by any opposition. It cannot be mastered or prevailed upon even by the gates of hell. But it goes on willing, desiring, and loving good. See, once God comes and changes our will to His will, nothing can change that. And we have that goodness in us, but it's the inner man, and you still have the outer man, and you still have that desire to sin. And God says that outer man must die. Just as once it willed and desired and loved evil, now it loves God. But that's just the inner man. We have an inner man and an outer man. The outer man is self. And God says there's an inner man that will never change. It can't be lost because it can't sin. Whosoever is born of God doth not commit sin. His seed remaineth in him, and he cannot sin because he's born of God. That inner man in 1 John 3 and 9 cannot sin. That's Christ in you, the hope of glory. If the inner man can sin, Christ in you can sin. But he can't. And it cannot will anything evil. The outer man wills evil. God says, I want to kill off that man. He's full of self and he's full of all that he wants. But it goes on willing and desiring and loving good just as once it willed and desired and loved evil. Experience proves this too. How firm and invincible, I like this, how firm and invincible are holy men, who when forcibly constrained to sin are the more provoked therefore to desire good. Even as flames are fanned rather than quenched by the wind, here too there is no freedom, no free will to turn elsewhere or to desire anything else as long as the Spirit and grace of God remain in a man. In a word, if we are under the God of this world, strangers to the work of God's Spirit, we are led captive by Him at His will, as Paul said to Timothy in 2 Timothy 2:26, so that we cannot will anything but what He wills in our life. For He is a strong man armed who keeps his palace to such good effect that those He holds are at peace and raise no stir or feeling against him. So man's will is like a beast standing between two riders. I like this. If God rides, it wills and goes where God's will. And God gets on the horse when He wants to. As the Psalm says, I am become as a beast before Thee, I am ever with Thee in Psalm 73:22 and 3 and through 23. If Satan rides, it wills and goes where Satan wills. Now God simply kicks off the rider and says, I'm riding this horse, get off. Nor may it choose to which rider it will run or which it will seek, but the riders themselves fight to decide who shall have and hold it. And who do you think is going to win between Satan and God? That's going to be God. Let me just read one other thing. You describe the power of free will as small and wholly ineffective apart from the grace of God. Agreed. Now then, I ask you, if God's grace is wanting or it's lacking something, if it be taken away from that small power, what can it do? It is ineffective, you say, and can do nothing good. So it will not do what God or His grace wills. Why? Because we have now taken God's grace away from it, And what the grace of God does not do is not good. What the grace of God does not do is not good. What the grace of God does not do, what you do, and it's not the grace of God, it's not good. It has to be grace, and not by works. Not by our works are we saved. But He will work in us to will and to do of His good pleasure. Hence it follows that free will without God's grace is not free at all, but is the permanent prisoner and bondslave of evil, since it cannot turn itself to good. This being so, I give you full permission to enlarge the power of free will as much as you like. Make it angelic, make it divine if you can. If you think you can take man's will and make it angelic and make it divine, try. But once you add this doleful postscript that it is effective apart from God's grace, straightway you rob it of all its power. Man's will cannot do anything apart from God's grace. God has to impart His will into man. What is ineffective power but no power? So to say that free will exists and has power, albeit ineffective power, is in the sophist phrase a contradiction of terms. It is like saying free will is something which is not free. And there's no such thing as free will except with God. He has free will, man has none. Now you have to read Luther, read him slow, because boy, he's a profound writer. And it's like he said, man has no ability to come to God. And not only that, the Apostle Paul said, after I came to God, and after He came to me and drew me to Him, he said, I don't even have any ability to do good after I came to the knowledge of truth, and He put it into me and caused me to hear. If God does not take this dead person out here, a dead person, and bring that man alive and make him alive by His will, he won't come alive. He'll be dead, and he will die dead in his sin, and he will go to hell. The man, Jesus, didn't die for everybody before the foundation of the world. He was the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. Our names were written in the book of life before the foundation of the world, before the world began. The Lord knoweth them that are His. Isn't that an amazing statement? Look at 2 Timothy. Look at this. God knows those that belong to Him. 2 Timothy. Look at verse 19, chapter 2. Nevertheless, the foundation of God standeth sure, having this seal, the Lord knoweth them that are His. He knows those that belong to Him. That doesn't mean after they're believers. That means before the foundation of the world. And then he says, let everyone that nameth the name of Christ depart from iniquity. If you belong to Him and you were His before the foundation of the world, you will depart from iniquity, because that is what predestination is about. I hate the doctrine of free will, but there's no such thing. There's only free will with God. Free will with God. Man's will cannot be coerced into being free, because man has self-will and it can do nothing good, and it plunges to sin and to wickedness and to hell for eternity. That's where it goes. Man will not be pulled away and coerced away from his will to sin. He can't. Unless God births a man by His will. So when God comes to a man, He births him by His will, not by His. He births him by the will of God. Man doesn't have anything into it. See, people who don't believe in predestination, they say, well, God, Jesus died for everybody before the foundation of the world. And those who let Him in, into their hearts and accept Him, then they become children of God. There's only one problem. What if you're saying that He died for some people that won't let Him in and they end up in hell, but He died for them anyway. If He died for their sin, what are they doing in hell? This is such an incongruity. It doesn't fit. It doesn't mix. There's no sense to it. How can